Typography, as both a technological and aesthetic practice, has long functioned as a vehicle of colonial power. The global dominance of Latin-based scripts, often assumed to be neutral or universal in design, education, and digital standards, has deep roots in typographic hegemony. From the replacement of Anglo-Saxon runes after the Norman Conquest to the printing regimes of European empires, Latin script has served as a tool of cultural displacement and linguistic erasure. Today, non-Latin scripts remain marginalized, treated as decorative or peripheral in both pedagogical and technological contexts. This hierarchy is structurally embedded. Typeface classification systems like Voxotypi reinforce Eurocentric aesthetics by framing type history through Latin script alone. In digital environments, fonts and user interfaces often default to Latin norms, limiting non-Latin scripts through delayed standardization, reduced stylistic variation, and compromised readability. Many fonts for global scripts still rely on colonial-era models, reproducing outdated logics under the guise of modernization. However, these hegemonies are being challenged. Designers around the world are reclaiming typographic agency by creating culturally grounded and politically conscious typefaces. In South Africa, the Iron Age font foundry draws on indigenous material culture and post-colonial theory to disrupt typographic norms. Internationally, initiatives like Typographic support endangered scripts through collaborative practices that affirm linguistic diversity. This essay argues for a decolonial typographic future, one that not only includes more scripts but transforms the systems that govern type design and education. By interrogating historical norms and embracing pluralistic, locally rooted approaches, typography can shift from a tool of domination to a platform for cultural dignity and epistemic justice. Typography has historically operated as a tool of colonial power, entrenching Latin script as the global standard through conquest, religious conversion, and administrative control. Beginning with the Norman Conquest of England in 1066, and extending through Spanish imperialism in the Americas, the imposition of Roman letter forms displaced indigenous scripts and languages. Early missionary presses played a central role in this transformation, promoting Latin-based literacy while marginalizing or erasing existing writing systems. These practices reshaped the visual culture of colonized peoples and established a typographic hierarchy that continues into the digital present. Today, this legacy persists in educational systems and classification frameworks that privilege Latin typography. Canonical models such as Voxotypi organize typefaces according to European historical categories, making little room for the structural logics of non-Latin scripts. In design pedagogy, Latin is frequently treated as the default, while other scripts are presented as exotic or decorative deviations. This entrenched bias is reinforced by Enlightenment and modernist ideals that equate typographic clarity with neutrality, obscuring the cultural specificity of Roman letter forms. The result is a typographic discourse that not only excludes non-Latin traditions, but actively shapes how scripts are valued and reproduced. Many non-Latin fonts today are adaptations of colonial-era models, adjusted to fit digital environments built around Latin parameters. Such conditions restrict the potential for typographic innovation within other script traditions and limit the ways in which visual language can express cultural identity. To address this imbalance, typography must be reimagined through a decolonial lens, one that interrogates historical hierarchies and affirms the legitimacy of all writing systems. This requires a fundamental rethinking of typographic education, classification, and design practice to foster a pluralistic, inclusive visual culture. Only then can typography truly serve as a space of cultural dignity and expressive justice. Typography education is deeply rooted in Eurocentric frameworks that have long shaped how letter forms are categorized, taught, and valued. Central to this structure is the Voxotypi classification system. developed in the mid-20th century to organize Latin script typefaces into historical and stylistic categories. While this system has provided a shared vocabulary for Western type designers, it systematically excludes non-Latin scripts, reinforcing a typographic hierarchy that privileges Roman forms. This exclusion is perpetuated through design pedagogy, especially in Western institutions, where the structural and aesthetic principles of non-Latin scripts are rarely introduced. Typography courses tend to focus on kerning, alignment, and anatomy as defined by Roman letter forms, framing them as the normative standard. As a result, students are implicitly taught to see non-Latin scripts as secondary, decorative, or anomalous. The privileging of Latin typography is not incidental. It emerges from Enlightenment ideals that associate clarity and legibility with universality and reason. These values were encoded in neoclassical typefaces and further institutionalized by modernist design movements like the Bauhaus and Swiss style. While often regarded as neutral, these styles reflect culturally specific notions of order and objectivity that do not translate across scripts with different visual logics and linguistic needs. This pedagogical canon functions as a form of soft power, shaping what is considered typographically valid. It narrows the field of innovation and limits the expressive potential of type design outside the Latin tradition. To decolonize typography, educators and designers must go beyond token inclusion of global scripts. They must rethink classification systems, design methodologies, and curricula to reflect the full range of human writing systems. Only by doing so can typography become a truly pluralistic and culturally responsive discipline. The typographic hierarchies established during the colonial era have not disappeared in the digital age. They have simply evolved. Today, structural inequities continue to disadvantage non-Latin scripts across digital environments, embedding exclusionary assumptions into the core of type systems, software, and user interfaces. While Unicode was introduced in the 1990s as a universal encoding system for digital scripts, it has disproportionately prioritized Latin, Greek, and Cyrillic alphabets. Many indigenous and non-Western scripts, such as Adlam, Nako, and Brahmic derivatives, have faced significant delays in support, threatening their visibility and survival in digital communication. These challenges are compounded by the design of user interfaces and digital platforms, which often assume Latin script as the default. Elements such as spacing, alignment, and hierarchy are built around Roman letter forms, requiring designers of non-Latin scripts to adapt or compromise their visual systems to maintain functionality. The result is a digital environment that limits the expressive range and cultural integrity of global scripts. Additionally, many non-Latin digital fonts are based on colonial-era type models originally developed by missionaries or colonial printers. These designs often imposed Roman stylistic conventions, such as stroke contrast and baseline alignment, onto scripts with distinct aesthetic logics. The continued digitization of these outdated models sustains a visual hierarchy that favors Western norms while marginalizing others. These inequities are not incidental, but structural. They are embedded in the architecture of digital typography, perpetuating Latin script as the normative ideal. Addressing these imbalances requires more than incremental fixes. A truly equitable future demands the reimagining of typographic systems from the ground up, embracing diverse script traditions, respecting their formal complexities, and building infrastructures that enable typographic plurality across languages and cultures. Designers and scholars around the world are increasingly challenging the colonial frameworks that have long shaped typographic practice. In place of Eurocentric conventions, new models are emerging that emphasize cultural specificity, historical reclamation, and scriptural diversity. These post-colonial approaches reject the notion of a universal typographic canon and reframe typography as a space of cultural memory, political expression, and epistemic justice. The Iron Age font foundry in South Africa exemplifies this shift. Rather than adapting Roman letter forms, it creates typefaces inspired by indigenous material culture, including Zulu artifacts and pre-colonial design motifs. These typefaces function not merely as aesthetic innovations, but as conceptual challenges to Western typographic dominance, reconnecting typography to locally rooted visual traditions. Similarly, the design magazine eJuicy has served as a platform for Afrocentric experimentation in type design. Drawing from vernacular signage, protest graphics, and township aesthetics, the magazine fosters a critical rethinking of what counts as legitimate or professional typography. Its contributors do not imitate Western models, but use type to assert cultural presence and political agency. On a global scale, the Dutch foundry Typographic has expanded the scope of type design through its dedication to non-Latin scripts. Working closely with native speakers, Typographic creates fonts that honor the structural and aesthetic logic of diverse languages, including those historically marginalized in digital environments. Its publications reflect a commitment to multilingualism and typographic equity. Collectively, these initiatives mark a turn toward decolonial typography, one that challenges the scriptural hierarchy of the Roman alphabet and champions a pluralistic future. In doing so, they position typography not as a neutral design tool, but as a medium through which communities can reclaim language, history, and visual sovereignty. To fully address the structural inequities embedded in typographic history and practice, designers and educators must move beyond reactive inclusion and toward a fundamentally decolonial framework. Such a future demands not only the diversification of scripts and type libraries, but also a rethinking of the ethical, classificatory, and pedagogical foundations of the field. At the core of this shift is the need for an ethical framework that recognizes type design as a site of cultural responsibility. Replicating Eurocentric standards perpetuates epistemic violence by privileging one scriptural tradition over others. Ethical type design must therefore reject universalist assumptions and embrace methodologies that are locally situated, community-informed, and historically accountable. This involves not only designing for marginalized scripts, but collaborating with speakers, writers, and typographers from those communities. Such an approach acknowledges that type is never neutral. It carries values, worldviews, and collective memory. A decolonial future also requires reimagining typographic classification systems. Instead of imposing Latin-derived categories, like humanist or Didone, on all scripts, designers should develop taxonomies that are specific to each script or that consider interscript relationships. Hunt has proposed an attributes-based model that takes into account factors like contrast, weight, and stroke modulation across systems. This enables analysis that is comparative yet not hierarchical, descriptive but not assimilative. Finally, decolonizing typography must be an educational imperative. Global design curricula still prioritize Roman letter forms and Western typographic history. To counter this, educators must integrate global scripts, alternative genealogies, and critical theory, teaching students not only to design non-Latin fonts, but also to engage with their histories and politics, cultivates typographic literacy as a form of cultural awareness critique. The movement toward decolonial typography is not about discarding Latin forms, but unseating their assumed universality to make space for coexisting visual languages, a network of intersecting stories, each with its own logic and voice. Typography has long functioned as a tool of cultural dominance. The global primacy of Latin script stems not from natural evolution, but from centuries of colonial imposition and Eurocentric systems. From medieval England to the Spanish Americas, typographic history is marked by erasure and assimilation. Today, systems continue to marginalize non-Latin scripts. In response, designers and scholars are reshaping typography as a site of cultural sovereignty. Projects like the Iron Age Font Foundry and Typothek push beyond inclusion, calling for structural transformation that affirms all writing systems as equally valid and culturally expressive.